Hello everyone, it's Hoplite Mike. I hope you're all doing well. Today I'm back with Lord of the Rings Total War Remastered, which is a mod for Total War Rome Remastered. I'm doing a faction guide and overview for the Sylvan Elves, also known as the Woodland Elves or the Mirkwood Elves. It's probably one of the more difficult Elven campaigns just because you don't have the late game powerful units that the other Elven factions have, but it is enjoyable all the same. I'll start with the unique characters and generals. As the Sylvan Elves, you start with 3 generals. You've got your faction leader Thranduil, the faction heir Legolas, and lastly a 3rd general called Falathor. Thranduil can be found in Thranduil's Palace, which is also your capital. So if I pull him out here, you'll be able to see the model. So an excellent looking model here. He's got a Mirkwood Elves kind of outfit, and then of course the long blonde hair. Further to the west, we have Legolas, who is sporting the outfit from the Lord of the Rings films. So if we move him, you'll be able to see that a bit better as well. Of course, the models for Legolas and Thranduil are unique. And then if we move into our second settlement, we will find Falathor. Falathor is just a generic general for the Sylvan Elves. So this model you're seeing here will be the model for every general that spawns in after the start of the campaign. In terms of the bodyguard units, both Thranduil and Legolas have the same bodyguard unit, being the Greenwood Sentinels. The Sentinels are not a recruitable unit. The only way you have them is by having Legolas and Thranduil alive as generals. So if you lose either Legolas or Thranduil, then that unit will go with it. So you want to use them because they're very strong, but try not to lose them needlessly. They are very strong hybrid melee and arch units. The missile attack of 20 on the base unit and range of 170 is nearly unmatched. I can only think of one arch unit that has better range than that. And then of course the high defense and attack combined with the +3 hit points makes them very effective in melee combat as well. So these are an excellent general unit for Thranduil and Legolas to have. Moving on to Falathor, who's the generic general. She has the Emerald Guard bodyguard unit. So every general that spawns in after the start of the campaign will have the Emerald Guard as their bodyguard. And this is a very tanky sword unit, quite similar to the generic general's bodyguards for the Noldor Elves. But the defense of 29 and melee attack of 6 on the base unit, combined with the +3 hit points, makes them very tanky, very tough to kill, and this is where most of your power comes from when you're playing as the Sylvan Elves. Unlike the other Elven factions, the Sylvan Elves don't really have really powerful late game units, so most of the power just comes from your generals and these Emerald Guards. So what I like to do is just conquer as many settlements as possible, which will spawn as many generals as possible, and then you can just stack them up, and that army will be able to steamroll most opposition. There's very little in terms of opposing units that can deal with the Emerald Guards in one-to-one combat. So that's it for the Sylvan Elves. They just start with 3 generals, but obviously the power of them makes up for the fact they don't start with that many. In this section, I'm going to cover the economy. So the Sylvan Elves do struggle to bring in a lot of money, but that is somewhat balanced by the cheap upkeep of their units. Even if you go to some of the mid to late game units, such as the Woodland Wardens, which are the best melee infantry you have, they still have quite a cheap upkeep of 190 per turn, which is a lot lower than some of the elite tier units from other factions. In terms of your actual income then, if you go to any settlement and click on the income tab, you'll be able to see a breakdown of that income. There are 3 main revenue streams, being the farming income, taxes, and trade. As an Elven faction, you don't have access to farms at all. None of the Elven factions can build farms, So that is quite a big restriction on your income. Because if you think about a faction like Gondor that can build up to tier 5 of the farm, they can quite easily be receiving 1,000 in farming income per turn per settlement. So the fact that the elves can't build farms does mean there's quite a big cap on your income. That also poses a challenge for taxes, because taxes is based on the level of population, and farms give you population growth. So the fact you can't build them also hurts your tax income. However, just bear in mind that your capital, Thranduil's Palace, does have hidden resource healing, which means you can build the healing buildings, which does give you population growth. You can't build these in many places, but just try to get them where you can, because that will help. And also, the government buildings also give you population growth if that settlement has hidden resource elves. So you'll see here that the first tier gives you 2.5%, and that scales downwards to the tier 5 building, which gives you 0.5%. But that is only the case where that settlement has hidden resource elves. So in terms of what settlements have hidden resource elves, generally that's your starting settlements, plus some neighbouring rebel regions. And that's the same for the other elven factions, such as the Lothlorien elves and the Noldor elves. And to demonstrate that, I have taken control of Fenberg for the purposes of this video. This settlement does not have hidden resource elves, and you'll see that the government buildings don't give you that population growth. So it's just something to bear in mind, that the lower tiers of government building will give you higher population growth if that settlement has hidden resource elves. So it's not always worth it to upgrade, because you drop 1% going from tier 1 to tier 2, and then you drop a whole 1% going from tier 2 to tier 3. So it can be worth it sometimes to stay at the lower levels just to get the extra population growth and extra tax income. So that covers the farming income and taxes. So in terms of trade, there are 4 buildings that can increase your trade income. That is the trader, which is here, the ports, the roads, which aren't shown here because we can't build them in this region, and then also the mines, which aren't shown because we can't build mines in this region. But essentially, there is also a soft cap on your trade income, because even though you can build ports, you start very far away from the sea. So there's nowhere close where you can build ports and increase that trade income. So even though you can build them, it's not going to be that helpful to you until much, much later in the campaign. In terms of the roads, to be able to build roads in a settlement, that settlement needs to have hidden resource road. And then a lot of the regions in the forest don't have that, for example. So you won't be able to increase your income that way, and it does mean transporting troops takes a bit longer. In terms of mines, so there's no settlements that are that close where you can build mines. The closest ones, I think, are along these mountains here and then in the north, but that is one of the strategies I go for in my campaigns as the Sylvan Elves, as I try to expand west and take some of these settlements along the mountains just to be able to build those mines, because it's really one of the only buildings you can get as a Sylvan Elves to really increase your income. And then the last trade income building, or the last economy building that increases your trade income that we went through, was the trader. So there's not many restrictions on this building. You'll be able to build it in most settlements that you capture. In order to have access to this or build it in a settlement, that settlement needs to have hidden resource men, elves, dwarves, or glass. So most regions are inhabited by men at the start of the game, such as Rohan, Gondor, Harad, the Easterlings, and Dale will have hidden resource men, as well as lots of the rebel regions. Then the dwarven starting settlements generally have hidden resource dwarves, and the elven settlements generally have hidden resource elves. So the trader is definitely one way that you can increase your trade income, but I would just check before you build it what sort of income increase you're going to get, because Thranduil's Palace can't trade with that many regions, and you'll see that if I build the trader here, it only gives plus 14 gold, so it's really not worth building. Generally, when it comes to the economy, I just try to grow my economy by taking more settlements. So it's better to invest in armies rather than investing in starting provinces, because that trader there would have cost 600 gold, and it's only giving me plus 14 per turn, whereas 600 gold could be invested into an army, and then you could take a settlement with that, and every settlement will have a decent base income, regardless of how built up the settlement is. So taking Fenberg, even though it's not built up at all, it's still got an income of 700 gold per turn. So I just like to take as many settlements as possible, even if they don't seem like they're worth going for. That's generally the best way to build your economy. And also prioritizing those settlements that have along the mountains where you can build the mines. I think that's about it for the economy, and I'll move on to recruiting. This next part will be on recruitment. So there are 3 buildings to be aware of when it comes to recruiting as the Sylvan Elves. You've got the standard barracks or training ground building line, which gives you access to your archer ranged units. You've got the forge, which gives you access to your melee infantry units. And then you've got the port, which also gives you access to 1 unit, being the Teleri Marinas. So it makes sense to talk about the barracks or the training ground first. Tier 1 gives you access to the Elven Archers, as it does for all the Elven factions. Tier 2 gives you access to the Mirkwood Rangers, which are a specific unit, or a faction-specific unit for the Sylvan Elves. Tier 3 gives you access to the Elven Scout Cavalry. And Tier 4 just gives you bonuses to the public order. So, like with the other Elven factions, there are restrictions on this building tree, as well as the units that you can get from it. So you can build the Elven training field in any region, but to build beyond Tier 1, you need that region to have hidden resource elves. So, for example, Thranduil's Palace does have hidden resource elves, so of course we can build up to the 4th tier of that. Whereas Fenberg, for example, which I've just captured for the purposes of this video, this region does not have hidden resource elves, and you'll see that I can only build Tier 1 of the training field. I can't build beyond that because it's not got hidden resource elves. So that's the restriction on the actual building line itself. In terms of the units that you can get from this building line, Tier 1, as we discussed, gives you access to the Elven Archers, but only if that region does not have hidden resource orc. So, for example, Fenberg doesn't have the hidden resource elves, but it doesn't have hidden resource orc either. So I can still build Tier 1 of the barracks or the training field, and I can still get the Elven Archers from there. But if we go to a region in Mordor, which does have hidden resource orc, you'll see that even though I can build Tier 1 of the training ground or the barracks, I can't recruit any units because this settlement has, or this region has hidden resource orc. So it's just something to bear in mind that when you start conquering Mordor, it will be quite difficult to recruit your troops. So that's the restrictions on the barracks. Next I'll move on to the forge. So Tier 1 of the forge gives you access to your Sylvan swords and Sylvan spears. Tier 2 gives you access to the Woodland Wardens and the siege equipment. And then Tier 3 gives you access to your cavalry, the Riders of the Green. So like with the training ground, there are also restrictions on this building line. You can build the tier 1 forge in any settlement, but to build beyond tier 1, you need that settlement or region to have hidden resource elves. So Thranduil's Palace does have hidden resource elves, and we can build up to tier, or we can keep going in that building line past tier 1. If we go to Fenberg, which doesn't have the hidden resource elves, you'll see that we can only build tier 1 of the forge. Like with the training field, there are also restrictions on the units that you can get from that building. So in tier 1, we can get the Sylvan Swords and Sylvan Spears, but only if that region doesn't have hidden resource Orc. So if we go back to the settlement in Mordor, you'll see that even though we can build tier 1 of the forge, we can't get any units from it because this region has hidden resource Orc. And that's not the case for Fenberg, where we can still get the Sylvan Swords and Sylvan Spears because this region doesn't have hidden resource Orc. So then obviously, because you need hidden resource elves to be on tier 2, a requirement to recruit the Woodland Wardens, the Siege Equipment, and the Riders of the Green is that you need to have hidden resource elves. So that covers the training ground and the forge. Actually, something else to mention about the forge is that the Sylvan Elves can recruit the Mithlond Sentinels from tier 3 of the forge in the Grey Havens, but the Grey Haven starts under the control of the Noldor Elves, so unless they lose it or you take it off them, you won't have access to those units, but they're a good hybrid melee infantry and archer unit, and there are some units of that start in the settlement, but we can't see them because we're not playing as the Noldor Elves, but it's just something to bear in mind that you can get a region-specific unit if you take the Grey Havens. So that covers the barracks and the forge. As I was saying before, you can get one unit from the port, but there's nowhere close where you can actually build the port, so it's not really that relevant. And then, of course, you've got your upgrade buildings, the practice fields, rangers, blacksmiths, and the armourer. Or the training ground, sorry. So, yeah, as I say in most of my faction guide and overview videos, I tend to try and build these in regions that you're not dependent on for money because they all come with tax penalties. So try not to build these in settlements that you have very high income from. I usually just choose 1 or 2 settlements to build these in and just send all my units for retraining there to take advantage of that. But that's about it for the recruitment of the Sylvan Elves. It's not that much to go through, and there's not any scripts to my knowledge, but yeah, I'll now move on to the campaign strategy. So now that we've covered the economy and recruiting, I just want to touch on campaign strategy. So the first port of call is our victory objectives. In order to win the campaign, we need to take 5 specific regions, being Thranduil's Palace, Dol Guldur, Emyn Luthien, Erin Lasgellin, and Barad-dûr. Initially, taking 5 regions doesn't seem like that much of a challenge, but Barad-dûr is Mordor's capital, so we essentially need to beat or defeat Mordor to win the campaign. Out of the 5 regions that you need, you actually start with 2 of them, being Thranduil's Palace and Erin Lasgellin, so we need to take Emyn Luthien, which is here, and Dol Guldur. So the first thing to note here is that this settlement here does start quite close to Dale. So if you don't take this region quickly, sometimes Dale can swoop in and take it. So just try and make sure you get there before they do. And in regards to Dol Guldur, basically you want to take this fairly quickly if you can, because if you let Mordor build up its forces, you're going to be facing a full stack, which is not going to be that much fun. So generally when I'm playing as the Sylvan Elves, I just take Legolas and Thranduil and go straight for Erin Dolan, and then head straight down to Dol Guldur after that to try and take it in the fewest amount of turns possible. So after taking those two settlements, the next objective I usually go for after that is basically to spawn as many of your generals as possible. So when playing as the Sylvan Elves, something to note is that they don't have really powerful late game units like the High Elves do or the Lothlorien Elves. Most of the power comes from your general units, the Emerald Guards. So I just try to spawn as many of these as possible, and to do that we need to take as many settlements as possible. So after I've taken the two regions we discussed, I generally expand west and take as many of these rebel regions as possible. You want to go as far west as the mountains because you can build mines in these settlements and they are very lucrative. And if you can, try and take some of these rebel settlements next to the Lothlorien Elves because they have hidden resource elves and you can get some of your better military buildings here, get some better troops. So once you've done that and expanded west, you are generally in a position where you can then go for Mordor. So generally by the time you get to Mordor, they will have built up a lot of full stacks and they're quite difficult to deal with, which is why I try and spawn in as many generals as possible to try and deal with them. Generally, I want to try and get 2 full stacks going over to Mordor to try and have a good go at taking Barad-dûr. And something else to note is that when Sauron is killed, Mordor is defeated as a faction. The faction gets destroyed. And generally, Sauron just sits in Barad-dûr. So you don't need to go taking all of Mordor's settlements to defeat them. I would just try and go through Morannon or the Black Gate and then just go straight for Barad-dûr. Don't get involved in unnecessary battles because it's not actually going to help you destroy the faction there. I think that's probably everything on campaign strategy. Something that is worth noting is actually that Dol Guldur starts as a huge city. So straight away you can build, I think it has hidden resource elves as well, so you can build basically every military building here right up to the top tier straight away. So this is a great settlement to take as quickly as possible, and you can use this as your military recruiting center. So that's generally it. It's one of the shorter campaigns based on the victory objectives because basically the victory objectives are just to defeat Mordor, but it is a lot of fun all the same. I'm now going to do a full run through of the unit roster on the battlefield. I would say that the Sylvan Elves or the Mirkwood Elves lack late game powerful units that some of the other Elven factions have access to. However, there are some solid options here. They have a couple of great archer units, as you would expect for an Elven faction. There's some limited cavalry options, and also some decent melee infantry. I'll start with the Elven Archers, which every Elven faction has access to via Tier 1 of the Training Grounds. They have a very high missile attack of 16, combined with an excellent range of 160. This actually puts them on par with elite tier archer units from non-Elven factions in terms of pure archer performance. They take 2 turns to recruit and have an upfront cost of 400, plus upkeep of 110 per turn, which makes them excellent value for money. The attack and defense means they aren't good in melee combat, and they do have quite a low unit size of 72, which can be a problem against some of the factions you fight in the early game that have huge unit sizes like the Orcs, because your ammunition will only go so far. However, overall, they are a very solid early game unit. Next, we have the Mirkwood Rangers from Tier 2 of the Training Grounds. These are the best dedicated archer unit that the Sylvan Elves have access to. They have a 590 recruitment cost and then 160 upkeep per turn thereafter. The thing to note is that they aren't actually much better than the Elven Archers we just looked at. They have +1 missile damage, but the same range, and only slightly higher defense to better protect them from ranged fire. I think their only real advantage is the increased unit size, which in theory would mean they have more ammunition by virtue of being a large unit. But then again, they actually have less ammo per archer, to the extent that they have less ammo overall. If you look at the ammo stats here, you'll see they have 20 ammo per soldier, compared to the Elven archers that have 25 per soldier. And that means that overall the Elven archers have 1,800 ammo, whereas the Mirkwood Rangers have less than that. So I believe they have less killing potential overall. So there really isn't much of a difference here, especially since you need tier 2 of the training ground to get the Mirkwood Rangers, and tier 2 of the training ground allows you to recruit the Elven archers with +1 experience, so you make up the +1 missile attack difference. Given that you need value for money as the Sylvan Elves with the restrictions on the economy, I would generally go for the Elven archers in the early to mid game instead of the Mirkwood Rangers, and just save the money and spend it elsewhere. Next we have the Scout Cavalry, which every Elven faction has access to from tier 3 of the training grounds. So as I mentioned in the Noldor Elves faction guide and overview, I do find Horse Archers to be fairly overpowered in Rome Remastered, just because you can take out full armies without taking any losses. So I do consider this unit to be inherently very strong, especially given the really high missile attack of 18, which is in line with elite tier units. The real issue, or the thing that holds them back, is the limited ammo of 15 ammo per archer, which means the ammo overall won't actually go that far. They do take 3 turns to recruit, have a 690 recruitment cost, as well as 180 upkeep per turn. They aren't brilliant in the melee. I would generally just use them for flanking and chasing down enemy units, but I think overall these are a great addition to any roster. Up next, we have the first melee infantry unit, being the Sylvan Swords, recruitable from tier 1 of the Forge. They cost 470 gold and have a 130 upkeep cost per turn thereafter. There isn't too much to say about them, they're just a great all-rounder at a reasonable cost. The defense is solid, the attack is average, and morale is excellent. They will certainly do a job for you in the early to mid game, and they also have quite a good unit size for the elves as well. Then we have the only spear unit of the roster, the Sylvan Spears, that you can get from tier 1 of the Forge. They cost 380 gold and have a 100 upkeep cost per turn thereafter. Like with the Sylvan Swords, they're just a great all-rounder. The defense is very good, melee attack is average for a spear unit, and the morale is definitely on the higher end. They will be able to hold the line for you in the early to mid game while you get your kills with the deadly archers fire. Then we have the elite tier infantry of the Sylvan Elves, being the Woodland Wardens. These are quite an interesting unit. So the melee attack is decent but nothing special, and the morale is very high like it is on all the Elven units. The defense looks low at 17, but they actually have +2 hit points, so they are fairly tanky. And importantly, they have armor piercing on their primary weapon, which ignores half the armor value of the target. So that's quite useful against certain units and factions. Mordor does have a lot of monsters which have high armor values, so this unit will be able to cut them down quite efficiently. The unit size of 100 is on the lower end for melee infantry, but probably average for specialist units or elite tier units such as this. The last thing to note is the high charge stat of 8, which will give you a boost on entry into combat. Next we have the Riders of the Green, which are the best cavalry that the Sylvan Elves have access to. They cost 620 gold and 170 upkeep per turn thereafter, and like with the Elven Scout Cavalry, they do take 3 turns to recruit. Similar to the other Elven factions, the Sylvan Elves are not blessed with a range of strong cavalry. They only have 2 cavalry units, and this is the only non-missile cav they have the ability to recruit. The stats are decent. The melee attack of 7 is perfectly fine for cavalry units, The defense of 19 is on the lower end. The charge stat of 2 is slightly disappointing. Most cavalry units, or decent cavalry units, have a charge stat of 3, and of course, as with lots of the elven units, the morale is excellent. They are nothing special, and the unit size is on the lower end for cavalry as well, at 64. But if you do any cavalry, these will more than likely do the job. I just wouldn't expect them to do anything special. Then we move on to the Mithlond Sentinels. So all 3 elven factions can recruit the Mithlond Sentinels. The problem being you can only get them from tier 3 of the Forge in the Greyhaven settlement, and the Noldor elven faction starts in control of that particular region. So the only way you'd be able to get this unit is if you took that region off them and then used it to recruit the Mithlond Sentinels. So I think it's highly unlikely you would ever be able to actually recruit this unit as the Sylvan Elves, but I have included them for completeness as it is possible to get them. They are very strong units. They are melee and arch units combined, a hybrid unit, and the missile attack of 18 is excellent. It's actually better than the Mirkwood Rangers, and I think the missile range is also 10 higher as well. So in terms of archer performance, there's very little that beats these. The defense of 17 and melee attack of 6 also means they're very good in melee combat, especially since they have the +2 hit points to make them a bit more tanky. But overall, it's probably not worth going too much into detail on them because it's unlikely you'd be able to recruit them, but it is possible. Then we move on to the General's Bodyguard units, of which there are 2. The Greenwood Sentinels and the Emerald Guards. The Greenwood Sentinels are the bodyguard units for Thranduil and Legolas. They are the only generals that have the Sentinels as their bodyguard unit. All your other generals at the start of the game and those that spawn in after the start of the campaign will have the Emerald Guards bodyguard unit. So you will only ever have 2 units of the Sentinels. And if either Legolas or Thranduil die, you will lose your unit along with them. They are an incredible unit. The missile attack of 20 is virtually the best in the game. The missile range of 170 is also very good. I can only think of one arch unit that has a higher range than that. And the defense and attack means they're very good in melee combat as well. Additionally, the +3 hit points just adds to their tankiness. But these are an excellent unit, and you don't want to lose them if you can help it. Then we have the generic General's Bodyguard, the Emerald Guard. So as I was saying, every general that spawns in after the start of the campaign will have the Emerald Guard General's Bodyguard unit. This unit is just a very tanky sword unit. It's got a total defense of 29 and +3 hit points, so they won't go down without a fight, and the melee attack of 6 is very reasonable as well. This is what provides the main power throughout your campaign because you don't really have any strong late game troops, so you need to rely on your generals to provide the power. And that's generally the strategy that I use when playing Sylvan Elves, is to take as many settlements as possible to spawn as many generals as possible, and then use the Emerald Guards to steamroll into enemy territory. But an excellent unit, and very similar to the generic General's Bodyguards for the other elven factions as well. Lastly, we have the Teleri Marinas, which are the only units that you can get from the port. Every elven faction has access to this particular unit. Overall, they're not that strong. They are basically skirmish javelin units. They have quite low range and low ammo, but fairly high missile attack, reflecting the fact that they are javelin units. They do have the +2 hit points and a decent melee attack stat, but the defense is quite low, and I think they take 3 times to recruit as well. So overall, I wouldn't really use these, but they are there to recruit if you want them. So that's going to be it for this one. I hope you enjoyed the faction guide and overview for the Sylvan Elves, and I will see you on the next one.